Hi everybody, this is Tor Storley again, and in this video I will take a look at how you can create in Oracle using PL SQL code. You can create an Excel workbook inside the database based on a query or dynamic SQL statements. So we'll take a look at how you can go about creating an Excel workbook 2007 and up from Oracle database itself. So let's take a look at first how to get some data. So I'm gonna build on the top of my previous video about the SQL model class. However, that will be the way I'm getting the data. And in order to have some starting data, I decided to go to Edgar, which is the Security and Exchange Commission's website, to extract some financial data from there. So if you look, I have landed on the Security and Exchange Commission's webpage on the Edgar system. All these public companies has to submit their filings, and there are different types of filings, and we'll take a look at how you can retrieve some of this information. So when you land here under this Edgar search system for the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, you can see up here you have a company filing section. So when I click here, I'm going to this company search. This Edgar filing system are giving each company their own unique identifier, central index key. So let's say I want to get some data. This Edgar system is kind of kludgy. It doesn't really give you the data in the format you wanted to get it. So I can search by name. So I can say Abby, and it shows up like two of them. So I choose this one. I'm landing on this page, which is, I can use the classic version. I can just leave it like, so I'm going to use the selected filing. I'm interested in the 10K, and it looks like this is the latest report. So I'm going to click on that, and it opens up like this. One thing I can do to get through this document a little quicker, all this is like XBRL, so it's not very easy. So if you inspect this, you can see that the syntax, even though it's HTML, it has a lot of stuff within it. So it looks pretty basic here, but it gets very involved. So let me close this and do it in a slightly different way. So I can go to the sections, financial statements, and there's 7 of those. So let's say I'm interested in the income statement. So here's the income statement. If I click on one of these guys, you can see this is the metadata behind this particular number. So it's even though it's shown in HTML, it has these embedded fields within it. What I can do, for example, I can say inspect here on this number, creates a span, and it has this information within it. So it's a little more involved, and quite frankly, I find it kind of difficult to try to scrape these kind of pages. It's not easy. So instead, what I just did to get some data, I drilled into the financial statements, statement of earnings, and I simply did this. I just selected the whole thing like this, Control C, and I open up a spreadsheet. And so let's say it looks something like this. You come in and you simply paste it, but then you got to go ahead and you got to clean it up. So anyways, you can go through the data like this. You can make it look like this. So here you can see I cleaned out the balance sheet, I formatted properly, did the statement of cash, same thing here. So you can basically adjust the data in here and clean it up so it looks more like this. So here's the balance sheet, here's the income statement after I cleaned it out, and here's the statement of cash flow. Once you have this, you can import these sheets into Oracle as tables. You can simply go into Oracle, you can go into your tables here, right click and say import data, and it will pop up something like this. You can browse, you can go and get a file. Maybe I'll do this file here like this. It reads the data, it puts it in columns here. You can choose only what you need. It gives you some other information, what type it is. Maybe you want a more recent one. This is the worksheet. It will prompt you for data types, what columns you want, with insert statements, etc. And you need to give it a name. So let's say it's TBL1 here. We go next. And here's the columns. So perhaps I don't want all these columns, so I can just get rid of some of these. So here's the columns I need. Oh, the column name is not valid. Okay, so you can say maybe Y20 and maybe Y like this. So now you got a column name, you say next, and you simply say finished, and it generates a table for you. So if you refresh now, and you can see here, I created a table and I called it table 1, I believe. So here is the data for table 1. So as you can see, you do that with each one of those spreadsheet tabs, and then you load it in. What I did was I named it as the balance sheet. So you can see it up here. That looks like this. And then the statement of cash flow looks like this. And the income statement looks like this. However, I added another column to each one of these tables because I wanted to give the accounts like a number, like a general ledger style number. So for example, for balance sheet, we have all the assets will be up through, you know, the 1000 series here. And I also organized it to, you know, what comes typically within a balance sheet, like cash and equivalents starts the first one. So I gave that an initial number. I ordered so the total current assets had a number, well, including all these. So when I sort it, I'll get them in the right order. So I made up all these numbers for the cash flow statements, which I only filled some of them because I don't need all of them. And the income statement I did too, from 5,000, 6, 7, 8,000, and I just made up those numbers. So these are the 3 tables we're going to be using to generate our data for our Excel spreadsheet when we're going to export it out of Oracle. Let's get ready and build a export system. What I did was I like using packages containing all the objects relates to a certain module, if you will. I like creating packages, so that I always wrap all my functions and procedures inside packages. I use SQL Developer here, as you can see, and I have it hooked up to my Oracle 21c XC database, which you can download from the Oracle Technical Network. I created this package called Generate Excel Reports. I basically added this procedure inside of it, and it's pretty basic. It just expects one parameter coming in, ticker value. Currently I only have one company, but you could add more companies and then use this type of technique to get data for other companies as well. Here is the package name. This is the package name. This is the procedure name. My structure here is typically to give it some kind of introduction to what I'm doing inside this procedure. So actually this is a procedure, another function. What it does, it will create data using cursors, and it will populate those cursors. It will pass it on to another package that we're going to look at that would actually do the heavy lifting to generate the Excel output. So here is some error handling variables that I usually use, and I use this technique pretty much for any procedure or any package that I create. So I add this error handling routine. Here is where I declare my local variable, which is the file name that I will be using for the output for the workbook. Here is the different ref cursors that we're going to be using. So I'll use this sys ref cursor, which is kind of clean. It's an implicit type of ref cursor, so it will clean itself out when it's done. Oracle will take care of that for you. Here is where I start my first cursor that's going to build my first sheet. Here is the strategy. We open a cursor, and I use this with CTE format to get the data from one of the tables. And then I build on the top of that. And for those of you who watched my Oracle model clause video, you might recognize some of this syntax here. If not, I urge you to go back and take a look at that video so you understand much more about how this model clause works. I will not spend too much time on it in this video. So go and check that out so you can get a much more detailed background on how this Oracle model clause works. So here is my select statement. I do some formatting for these different fields. Here's the model clause introduction. I dimension by account number here. And the measure are in the account that comes from the table. This field comes from the table. This field comes from the table. Just to get an idea, let's just query that table quick. I might have to move this into a separate window here. So let's run that. And here you can see it's coming back with accounts from the balance sheet, and it comes back with 2020 and 2019 data. So you have the account number, the account name, and here is the actual dollar value for each one of those accounts. So that's what that particular query is doing. And then I build on the top of that using this model clause to do all these kind of computations. Here I'm doing a sequential order, so that means that this measure would be calculated first before this becomes calculated. So basically I'm taking the 2020 number, so this one, subtract this one to get the change in dollar value, and that's what this one is doing here. This is the dimension, which in this case we're using the account number. Down here we use some specific syntax that I went through in the model clause video, where I would use the current value, whatever the current value is of what row you're on. So in other words, whatever the account number is, because these are referring to dimensions. So for the measure of 2020, I get the current value and I subtract the 2019 current value. And I do some case statements here. So if it's less than 1 or greater than 1, you know, the percentages will change. These case scenarios here will take care of that for you. And finally, here is where you actually do the computation, where you say the amount that you compute up here, which is the difference 2020 and 2019 for each account. Take that and take the current value and divide on the 2019 current value and multiply by 100 and round it to 1 digit. So that's what this particular query is doing. So if I run this query in another window here, just so you can get an idea. By the way, a lot of these other queries are similar, so I'm not going to spend so much time on them, except for the way that it's computed might be different. So when you run this, you can see this is what it brings back. So it gets the 2020 number, the 2019 number, calculates the difference between them in the amount column, and then I do that percentage change that you saw. So that's what this particular query is doing, and this is one of the simpler ones. Then we're getting to where we're actually going to take this, and then we're going to actually create a worksheet tab out of it and put it inside an Excel work. Now, in order to do that, which is pretty complex, because when you're building Excel workbooks after 2007 on, all of the Microsoft Office changed to something called Open XML format. And what that does is it uses XML within a spreadsheet itself. So in order to understand how you do this creation of a spreadsheet inside an Oracle database, we need to understand a little bit more about Excel before we can take the next step. So what I have here, this is my directory that I'm going to be spooling my files to. Here is a file that I already created before, and what I can do for Excel files, every Excel file is actually a zip file. So you could take this file here and you can simply rename it and give an extension .zip, so it becomes a zip file. And if you do that, it creates a zip file. So if I open this zip file now and take a look at it, it opens up like this. So inside the zip file is the actual Excel workbook. So it's become XML formatted now. There are many different parts to it. There's relationships. And what we can do is you can open it and take a look at it in some kind of text editor. So as you can see here, there's relationships IDs created. There are different parts of this. It has like shared strings, styles, the workbook itself. You can see here's the workbook, and it has a reference. So sheet ID 3 is referring to this reference ID. So it links all the parts together. Here you can see here's the sheet names and so forth, and it links everything together using all these different files here. There's also themes, shared strings. We can format this a little bit so it's a little easier to look at. So here you can see a bunch of numbers, a bunch of text in XML format. So an Excel workbook, therefore, is consisting of several parts, which is in XML format. When we create one of these workbooks, we basically have to mimic this creation. One, as you can see here, in order to build this, you need to create a zip file. 2, if you're going to modify a workbook, you need to be able to unzip the file. And 3, we need to be able to generate XML that is understood by Excel to be correct. So it's not very simple to do. Luckily for us, there is a fellow called Anton Schaefer who actually created a package in Oracle that actually does this zipping, adds styles and formatting, and actually builds workbooks of Excel sheets inside the Oracle database. So now that you have a little understanding about the process that we need to accomplish to make this happen, let's take a look at how you can do it inside Oracle now. I have this package called Generate Excel Reports that I start talking about. And inside that one, I run these queries, and these are model clause queries. And I basically build financial information from those. Then I'm getting to the part where I actually are gonna create Excel out of it. And in order to do that, you refer to this package called as XLSX. And I have this package right here. It's a pretty daunting amount of code in here. So there's not something we can spend a lot of time on. But this is really the package that will build the Excel. There are parts, like I said before, where you have all the zipping. For example, here is this finish zip. And if you look at it here, it basically works with parameters and variables, and it uses conversions, build a zip file out of it, as you can see here. So this package I've seen available on GitHub. If not, in the actual package header here, you can see Anton, he created this package back in 2011 timeframe and probably built it and worked on this for a while. But you can use this and you can change things and stuff as long as you keep his copyright information here. Then you can use this free of charge. You can actually, I used this package before in my actual work, and it worked really nice. As long as you don't have too complex workbooks that you have to create and not too large and so forth. The important, well, everything is important obviously, but the one that actually builds the arrays that is being used to populate the workbook is sitting in query to sheet. And I overloaded this one using it twice basically, but I'm passing in here a sysref cursor. The other one accepts dynamic string that is your query. Original one will actually parse out that string and build a ref cursor out of it. But I actually pass in a ref cursor here. So by doing it that way, I basically commented out a bunch of stuff. So this is the method. And here you can see he also built XML portions that is going to go into these different namespace documents that you saw in when I showed you the XML from the zipped up file of Excel. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in here, as you can see, all these fonts that he's going to be using and so forth. So without spending too much time on this, I'll let you research this package yourself. One thing you can do to kind of get an idea of how you can actually do this, if you go to the spec or the header, if you will, part of the package, and if you scroll down towards the end of that package, you can see there is 3 example you can actually run. So you can copy this, you can put it into a window like this. I already created a directory that I call stoltxdir, and if you look at that directory, you can see I actually created it this way here, like this. But once you create it and so forth, you should be able to find it in the directories folder here in SQL Developer. So if you open that up, you can see that's the name and that's the location. So that particular location is where I actually showed you the Excel workbooks. You can see this is where we want to spool out that file to. So if you run the code that I copied out in here, just the way it is, basically it's going to use this as XLSX package and call all those individual types of function you see here. For example, here is a new sheet function. Here you can see it. And then it calls the cell function, which is overloaded. As you can see, there's 3 of them here. So they have different signatures. In any event, you can run this. So if I run this, because I created my directory, it finished and it spools it out. And now I can go and take a look at created this particular one here. So if I open this guy up in Excel, this basically gives you an idea of different things you can do. And he has 3 different queries that actually used to illustrate some other things you can do with it. For example, you can see here, he can color a value here. There's a hyperlink generated, merge cells you can do. You can add comments, and you can highlight the row. So you can do some basic stuff, but I wouldn't use this technique if it was, you have to do a lot of formatting and so forth. It's really good for data dumps if you just need to generate spreadsheets out of the database. And the reason I used it in the past was because the Java developers was trying to run queries against the database and produce Excel workbooks, but it was the code was running really slow. And so I took a look at this and tried it out, and it was running much faster, and we were able to use this technique to generate spreadsheet data dumps. Now back to our package. So here you can see the basic premise is that you create a cursor, then you clear. This is the first time you do this, only for this first one here. But here's the basic call that's going to build the actual array that's going to populate the workbook. So you call this query to sheet that I overloaded, and then you're passing in the cursor. So for each sheet, I'm passing in a cursor, and then you create a sheet name, and that's going to be whatever you want to call this particular tab, the sheet. Then you can do different things, like here I'm freezing the first row, so you can use this freeze pane function, and then you're basically building the cells within that sheet. So here, this is the first column. So column 1, row 1, you have the headers. So as you can see here, all of these are row 1, and these are the headers I want to use for this particular sheet. And then I do a little bit of formatting. So I'm setting the column width, and this is for column 1, and this is for column 2, and I set it to 18. And here, this one I set to 58, so it spreads it out better, so it's easier to read. And I do this for sheet 1. And then this particular code here doesn't really work, so forget that one. This is the file name I want to use, and I basically build it as a timestamp, add it to an actual name, which is the ticker, and then suffix it with the XLSX extension. Then you just generate a new sheet, and then you start building it. So now I'm going to create my second query here, which is this. That also uses a model clause, and it basically builds a common size balance sheet. And without going into much detail about this, again, like I said, check out my SQL model clause video. And here again, calling the sheet again, builds a second sheet, freezes the first row. Here's the accounts, the headers, I should say. And this is sheet 3 now, just setting that. And then we continue like this. And here's a comparative income statement. This does some formatting. Here's some logic I use for the calculations. These are the rules. And again, it's a sequential order, so this will execute before this and so forth. And I keep going like this, and here I do some more adjustments to these different sheets, and I build it like this. And finally, I do financial statement ratio calculation. So as you can see here I'm actually selecting from the balance sheet, from the income statement, and the statement of cash flow, because I want to get all the data from all these 3 so I can actually do calculations. And I'm selecting them in here, and then I create some measures, and then I start building my ratio calculation. So here, for example, the dimension is the report, which is basically referring back to whether it's a balance sheet, income statement, or statement of cash flow. So let me just run this very quickly so you can see. Okay, let's do this. We can just run it like this. All right, so here you can see the report is basically an indicator to where it's coming from. Balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement. So you can see it here. These are the actual number we are generating here. So now that we have the actual data here, we can actually refer to them and do calculations on it. So that's what I do inside here. So once I get the data, I create all these measures, and I dimension by this report, and then the account number. That will be the dimension here. So therefore I refer to the report and the account number that I'm going to be using to base my calculations on. What happens here is I build new rows because they don't exist. I give them high numbers so they don't exist, so it actually builds it because I'm only returning updated rows, so all the new records that I generate. But I'm referring to existing data. So if you look at the query, for example, you can see here is these different account numbers, and when I actually do my calculations, you can see I'm referring to these account numbers here. So whatever the calculation has to be, coming from the balance sheet for 2020, this account divided on this account, and round those numbers. And then of course I create a ratio and liquidity category here, and this is the ratio, which is the current ratio in this case. So I have quick ratio, cash ratio, and a bunch of accounting ratios calculated. So as you can see, I build in different sections, and you can extend on this. Debt ratios. Here I started profitability ratio, but I got tired of all this typing, so I just stopped there. And then finally I pass that cursor in here, and I build a financial ratios sheet name, and again follow through the way I've been doing all along. Down here I simply have some error cleaning. So if there's some errors, I kind of log it. I have a error log table that I call to. So if there is a problem, I'm using my utility package, calling this. For every package I use, I usually go through this, so I have a error log in case something goes wrong. And here is my error log. And as you can see here, if something happens, it will give you the name of the procedure it came from, and it will tell you which line you failed on, and it will tell you what happened. So you can see there's some problems, and it gives you error code and so forth. So that's what this is doing down here. So now let's run this and see what happens. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm just going to type something. This is not necessary because I only have AbbVie data in there. So let's just run this, and it's done. As part of this package, as you can see here, I use these, I save it here, as you can see to the end. This is where it goes. But I use this DBM as output, put line statement, where I refer to each sheet that I create. And I added this variable inside the XLSX package. This part I added in so I could get the row count for each of those sheets. So I added some code here so I could actually execute that and get that printed out. It just gives you a little idea of how many records that came back. So now after we have done that, we can actually go and take a look at the spreadsheet I just created. So here it is, and 343, so that's the one. So let's open that and take a look and see what that looks like. So it's opening up. So as you can see, it created this tab, called it this name. Anyways, so this one shouldn't be there, obviously. So sheet 2 is just a dummy sheet that sits in here. So here you can see, as you load through these, you can see this one has a certain fixed width. This has a certain fixed width. And as I go through these, you can see I spread these out a little bit more so I have more room. But it generates all these different sheets, and here's all the ratios that I computed and populated here. Yeah, so that's how you can actually create Excel inside an Oracle database, which is kind of scary when you think about it. But for simple outputs like this, it might be something you want to think about using or not. Just wanted to show you that it's possible. And because of these enormous help from Anton, you can see a lot of these headaches he already done for you. So take a look at it and see what you think. And I'll see if I can put some links into this video so you can go and get some reference to this package and how you can do it. And I'll probably post this code out on my GitHub repository so you have access to it. Okay, I hope that was interesting, and I look forward to see you again really soon. And don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this, and let me know what type of videos you want to see. It's kind of hard to figure out what to produce if nobody says anything. So yeah, let me know, and thank you again.